All right, guys, we're going to talk about the next one of our major story elements. We've got setting, plot, character, conflict, and theme. We've already talked a little bit about setting, and we've already talked about plot. So today we're going to talk about characters and do a deep dive into different types of characters. So we're going to talk about two major categories, static versus dynamic, and simple versus complex. These are two separate categories. So a character can be either static, dynamic, and simple or complex. A character will fall into one of each of these categories. So again, we are going to find out about these characters in a story through explicit, direct characterization and implicit or indirect characterization. So we want to look through all these kind of things to figure out this information. So let's start with static versus dynamic. And here we're going to talk some definitions. Static characters stay the same throughout the story. Listen for that alliteration. Static characters stay the same. Static characters are the same at the beginning of the story and the end of the story. Whereas dynamic characters are the opposite. Dynamic characters change throughout the story. Dynamic characters are different. There's that alliteration to help you remember which one is which. So when we're talking about these changes, if they're static and staying the same, or if they're dynamic and they're changing and they're different at the end, we are not talking about changes like I'm taking my glasses off or suddenly I'm wearing glasses. We're not talking about those kind of changes. We're talking about the internal, personality, beliefs, those kind of changes. We're talking about who they are inside, what they believe, how they act, all those kind of things. Alrighty, so really quick, let's talk about some examples. We've got our friends from Finding Nemo up here, Marlin and Dory and Bruce the Shark. So Marlin is a dynamic character in this movie. At the beginning, he's totally afraid. He doesn't want Nemo to do anything. He doesn't want to go anywhere. He is very much, this is where we are. This is what we do. There's no changing it. Very overprotective. By the end of the movie, he still wants to be protective. He still doesn't want Nemo doing a lot of stuff, but he starts to let go and he starts to, kind of understand that Nemo is extremely capable of doing a lot more than Marlin thinks. He still feels afraid, but he's acting differently. He's letting go. Since he is different, he is now dynamic. So yes, he still feels afraid, but he's not acting on that fear as much. Where we have Dory. Dory's extremely static. At the beginning, she's super friendly. She is that just keep swimming. She believes that you can do anything. You just got to try. She is the same at the end of Finding Nemo, where she has that same personality, that same outlook, that same type of actions. At the end, she believes the same thing, so she's static. All right, here's our other category. We've got simple versus complex. So simple characters are defined as being shown by the author to have just one or two qualities. We don't know a lot about these characters. We sometimes also hear them called flat characters because there's not much to them, or one or two-dimensional characters. There's just not much there. We only know a little bit. What you see on the surface of these characters is all we know. So simple characters are kind of like this flat line, only goes one way. This is one dimension in math and science. There's very little we know. Two dimensions, we see a little more, but it's still a flat surface. There's nothing behind it. It's a square. The idea is that these characters, these geometric shapes, have no depth to them. There's nothing behind these characters. That's why we call them simple, one-dimensional, two-dimensional, or flat. Complex characters are, well, different. They have a variety of traits. They have different sides to their personalities that we see. They have more complex stuff. We get to know them better. A lot of these character traits may actually create conflict in the character because they might believe different things or have different emotions, have some strengths, some weaknesses, full range of emotions. So these characters are much more complex. We see them as more full characters. They are also called three-dimensional. And like in math and science, 3D is a cube. We have left, right, up, down, and back, forward. They have that depth. The other thing to consider is like this cube. In math and science, this cube has 6 faces. We can only see 3 right now. So the idea is we don't see everything in this character every single moment. That's why they're so complex. There's things that we don't see at that moment, but we know they exist based on what the rest of the story is telling us. Maybe the cube turns and we see the other faces other times, or it's hinted at, but either way, they are much more complex than just what's on the surface. All right, so let's look at another Nemo example for simple versus complex. So here we have our turtle surfer dudes with Marlin and Dory. So our turtles up here are simple. They are one-sided. They come across as kind surfer dudes, and that is all we know of them. They are consistently just like that. We don't see a lot of depth and differences in different sides to them. However, both Marlin and Dory are complex characters. We do see multiple sides. We see different emotions. They have that emotional depth. They have strengths. They have weaknesses. We see all different parts of their characters. So they are presented as complex characters. Now, in reality, would the turtles be complex characters as an individual if we spent more time with them? Yes. But they are presented in the story as a simple character. This is all we know of them in this story. That's all we need to know of them in this story. That's key to know, is what is the author giving us in presenting these characters? That is what makes them simple or complex. All right, so let's put it all together now. So just for fun, those simple characters that are very basic, do you think they are more likely to be static, the same at the end of a story, or more likely to be dynamic and different at the end of the story? Again, more likely, not always. So simple characters are more likely to be static. However, it's not 100% true. So the surfer dudes and that Bruce the shark, we are very simple characters to us. They are static. In fact, I think we see the surfer turtle dudes in both Nemo movies, Finding Nemo and Finding Dory, and they are both the same basic characters each time. They stay the same. All right, so complex characters now, are they more likely to be static or dynamic? Remember, complex characters, we see more of them, more understanding. They are more likely to be dynamic. Because we see more of these characters, we get to know them better, we are more likely to notice a dynamic change. However, again, not always the case. For example, Marlin and Dory are both complex characters. Marlin is dynamic, Dory is static. So it's not 100% true, it's just more likely to be true. All right, time for you to put it all together and think about this. Can you think of any characters that fit into any of these categories? Go ahead and list a character and explain if they're static or dynamic, and if they're simple or complex, and one quick sentence of why you think that.